Yes.
Okay, we are getting started. Thank you for everyone and rejoining us for our panel discussion on ag tourism and land use. And we definitely appreciate our panelists who are here with us today. We have one remote, and could I end up having Peter Carnegie, Barb Iverson, and Sam Bayer please come forward. And I think on the line is Gordon Howard, who is joining us remotely. I'll start as you're sitting down, Peter, and I would like to hear a little bit more about Ag for Oregon and what that's about too at the very beginning of your presentation, and then next will be Barb, will be up, Iverson, Sam, and then Gordon. So each individual has about 12 to 15 minutes, and so for presentation, allowing us to leave enough time for questions. And again, this has been a topic we've been dealing with a resolution for a while on the Board of Ag. And a lot of times we get a lot of letters and not necessarily being able to piece together the different parts of here's a perspective and here's a perspective. So we thought it would be great to thank you all for joining us to be on a panel so we could kind of hear it collectively at the same time and be able to ask some questions. So, all right, I'll turn it over to you, Peter.
Okay, and Carla, you got my slides up there? Can you pull those up? My name is Peter Carnegie. I'm a third-generation farmer in Benton County, North Albany, joining the city limits and the Willamette River. We're at kind of a unique place. We're on a loop. And, we're almost to a century farm, not quite there yet. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We do run a small agritourism operation. We've had a U-pick pumpkin patch for the last 30 years. And we have multi-generations. People come back every year. It's low-key. We don't offer any corn maze or anything. It's for those people that want a farm experience without all the hoopla. And there's another picture there of that you can slide to. But our cropping system, it's diverse. We do some livestock, mostly seed crops at this point. We used to do processed vegetables, but it's predominantly seed with an emphasis on native seed for the restoration market for specifically Western Oregon. So Ag for Oregon, you can go ahead and flip to the next picture there. One more. Ag for Oregon has recently been reincarnated in the past year. It was originally started back in the late 80s or early 90s by my parents, Cliff and Lois Carnegie and Hector and Kitty McPherson. And it was designed just to be a group of farmers that supported the land use protections and were active for a number of years until my mom kind of aged out of it, and then it kind of went defunct for a bunch of years. And this past year, about a year ago, Mike McCarthy from up at Parkdale and Jim Gilbert from the Willamette Valley and myself and Mickey Killingsworth from Eastern Oregon decided it was time to reinvigorate it. And so that's what we are. We're a group of farmers from around the state who are advocating for, specifically, that's our one issue. We're kind of a single issue organization just focused on land use protections. So, this is I'm not used to my new iPad. There, and you're not going to read this, but you guys should be familiar with this. This is your Board of Ag resolution on agritourism. And, really, I think what you currently have does a pretty decent job of trying to balance what the competing views on agritourism in the valley. And I support your current agritourism resolution. I see it's up for a review in 26, I think. Is that? Yeah, in 26. And, you know, one of the things that I think is often forgotten is just how much is allowed. And if you flip to the next couple slides or the next slide, you know, there's an awful lot of stuff currently allowed in under Oregon land use laws. And what's up there is a how does she term it? It's non-exhaustive examples of tourism uses allowed in EFU zones. No farm impact tests required. And you move to the next one, and it is for non-exhaustive examples of tourism uses allowed in EFU zones with the farm impacts test required. So there is, I mean, oftentimes people complain about not being allowed to do stuff. There is a lot of stuff that is allowed to happen under our existing rules. And, you know, I'm lucky in that I'm at a spot where I don't have neighbors that run extensive agritourism operations. You know, Mike McCarthy, who was originally scheduled to be here from Parkdale, he fights it all the time. And there'll be a couple pictures later on here. But one of the other things that we're seeing in the valley is a lot of hotels and stuff, people trying to set out in farmland that can have real impacts. And if you go to the next slide there, there's, you know, this is one example from Yamhill County, and go to the next one. You can find these places on the they're easy to find on the website. Not all of these, mind you, are in EFU zones. Some of them are actually where they should be. They should be within UGB in developed cities. And go ahead and flip to the next one there. And these pictures come from Mike McCarthy. This is up in Parkdale. And this is his farm to market road that he has to, when they're hauling fruit, that he has to deal with all that traffic and those pedestrians on the roads. And it's a severe hindrance to the operation of his business up there. Go ahead and flip to the next one. So, what is our goal as an agricultural community and as a state? Is it to maximize the short-term economic return for a few individuals, regardless of the impacts to neighbors and/or our already compromised landscape? Or is it to be thoughtful, conservative, and cautious before we do irreparable harm to future generations in the greater landscape we all depend on? So, that's most of what I got. And the points, to reiterate my points, there are a multitude of currently allowed agrotourism uses today. They oftentimes have significant impacts to adjacent farms and farming practices. And there's they put undue traffic impacts on farm-to-market roads. And they also impact the affordability of farmland. When large investments are made in infrastructure to support agrotourism on farm ground, you immediately raise the value of that property and essentially remove it from the market for the future. Any young farmer wanting to get started is not going to have the capital to purchase a place that has that kind of investment in it to farm. And they also they're an incremental they have an incremental impact on the actual available farmland. So those are my points roughly, so, and I'll leave it there.
I think what we'll do is we'll hold off, have each of you make your presentation, and we'll save comments and questions and answers till the end. So thank you, Peter. Barb, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, I'm glad you sounded really nervous, because I am too, so a little bit better. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I hope many of you have been to our place, but I'm gonna kind of just. I'm a little hodgepodge on my slides just because we were in.
Could you bring your mic
Sure
a little
can.
closer? Yeah, thank you. Great.
Is that better?
Yay.
Okay, thank you. So again, thank you for having me here today. So next slide. You know, our farm, my parents started the farm in 1950. They were newlyweds in November, bought the farm in December, proceeded to have 6 kids because they needed a lot of help on the farm. And over the years, you know, we've changed a lot. We've grown over 100 different crops on the farm, looking for that perfect home run. But so we've had a lot of diversity of crops. And at our peak, we farmed about 2,500 acres. A lot of it road farming, which I don't like road farming, but we farmed Minnow Brown Island. We farmed down in Jefferson. So just kind of a lot of travel. So next slide, please. So a little bit, these are a little bit hodgepodge, like I say. This is for our Tulip Festival, kind of the area that we have. We have a central area of about 300 acres that we have our Tulip Festival because we're on a 4 and 5 year rotation with our flowers. We dig the tulips every year and replant them. So we need that space for the rotation for the soil. The original 225 acres is actually across the street because we want the festival to be all on one side of the road. And then anything agricultural, any of the agronomic stuff is on the other side. Next slide, please. So these are kind of our brand. So Iverson Family Farms is the family farm. That's you know, digging, that's planting crops, combining, all of that. That's Iverson under Iverson Family Farms. Anything that's people oriented, that's Wooden Shoe. So if it's public facing, you guys go away. We're gonna take it from here. So that's a different group. That's my sister and sister-in-law, and we do that. And then estate wines. So when my nephew came back to the farm several years ago, he said, "Oh, we need to plant grapes." So we planted some table grapes and wine grapes because table grapes were going to be the next big thing. Didn't happen. But we started into the wine. So now we have all estate wines. And then we jumped on that bandwagon for hemp a few years ago. We hit a home run with it because we got in with Charlotte's Web. We supplied Charlotte's Web a lot of their oil. But as you know, that market went straight up and straight down. So it's done pretty much. Next slide. And just I'm backtracking here a little bit because we're out of sync, but a little bit about me. So I went to Oregon State, graduated with a degree in horticulture, and just been involved in a lot of different things. Next slide. Tulip timeline. So we got started growing tulips as a contract grower. So there was a guy from Terre Haute, Indiana that grew tulips in the Willamette Valley because of our ideal climate out here. We're about 2 weeks ahead of Holland. So he could grow the tulips out here, and that in a tulip bulb, that flower is fully formed by the 1st of August. So that flower inside the bulb is already there. If you cut a tulip bulb in half in August, you can make out all the flower parts. It's awesome. That's called the G stage. Once the bulb reaches the G stage, then it needs winter, so you chill it for 13 to 15 weeks. After that, you can take it out, put it in a greenhouse at 65 degrees, and you got a flower. So he grew it in the Willamette Valley, could do that. He would pack them up, take the U-Haul back to Terre Haute, Indiana, and force the bulbs. When he retired in 1980, my brothers had graduated from college and went back to the farm, and they were looking for a new crop. And so they bought the bulb stock and went into the wholesale bulb business. So that's their focus was we're going to grow these bulbs and we're going to supply the wholesale bulb business. It was pretty tough business. They weren't very successful. So in 1983, my sister, myself, and I had 3 sister-in-laws and my younger brother got together and said, "Hey, let's help the guys out. Let's start a little mail order retail company and see what we can do." And so that sounded good. So we had our varieties and a piece of paper. We went to garden shows and tried to sell from the garden shows. And it was not very successful. It was terrible, actually. So in '85, I had some neighbors, and the thing is, these neighbors kept saying, you need to open the field to the public. Well, the thing about being a farm kid is you don't know how blessed you are, because you walk out and you see those sunrises. You walk out and you see the birds flying. It's phenomenal experience. But all you really see, you see that stuff, but you see all the work that has to be done. So you're focusing on the wrong things. And so we take it for granted what we have out there. So anyway, we were going to be in full bloom in 1985 for Easter weekend. So I went to the Statesman Journal, and I took out a little ad that said, come see our fields this weekend. We're going to be open from 10 to 5. And we opened the field to the public for the first time. And the road that we were on that time was Newman Road, which is about as wide as this table. So, of course, we had a little traffic jam. And we understood that that was going to be kind of a problem, and we were going to have to deal with that fairly soon. But that was the opening of the field, and it was like, oh, well, maybe people do want to come out and see what we're doing out here. I think you can go to the next one. So in the 80s, 90s, our goal was to get people out there. We were going to sell them cut flowers. We were going to sell potted tulips. We were going to take their order for bulbs, and it was great. We were free. As many we could pack in there. We had perennial ryegrass fields. We could park a few on the side. Our main parking area we'd used for our nursery, which we'd put gravel on for a holding area for our nursery stock when we were shipping rhododendrons. And it was really, it was crappy ground. We kind of ruined it. So that became our parking lot. So that worked really well. And that model worked great, except we couldn't control anything. And in the early 2000s, I remember, after the festival, I was looking at the costs, and then I was looking at the income, and it was like, well, that was a lot of fun. And we're going to have to make a change here, or just pull the plug, and we'll pick every flower in the field and send it off to Safeway. And we decided, no, we're going to charge $5 a carload, because that's our limiting factor, it's our parking. And when we did that, the following year, more people came. So our attendance went up. So it's like, well, they're charging for that. There must be something out there. So we created value. There was that, and there was this little thing called Facebook, I think, that was coming around at the same time. So they kind of, people wanted to get their selfie out there. But our attendance went up, and that was a great model for us. But what we found is we couldn't control the traffic. So to get in was a couple hours. It's horrible. We hated it. Our neighbors hated it. We were always talking to our neighbors, trying to smooth it over, whatever we could, and alternate entrances. And our neighbors were awesome. They really, for the most part, there were only a couple that were really, I had to work hard on and take flowers to all the time, but most of them were really pretty good. But then in 2020, we were 3 days from opening the festival. Tents were there, porta potties delivered, crew all hired and trained. We got shut down. That was the year COVID hit. And it was beyond, well, I can't even go that was tough. It was really tough. That's all your income. Flowers didn't know we were in COVID. They bloomed. They were real pretty. But we couldn't open. So we just didn't open that year. But what it did allow us to do in 2021, when we did open back up, the state was still in kind of a flux. And we thought, well, we need to control the numbers. So we're going to do time ticketing. So we started with the time ticketing. We found we could control the number of people coming in. We could control that traffic. And it was a blessing in disguise. It's the only one good thing I can say that COVID bought us was time ticketing, because we'll never go back. You can control the number of people in and out, and it really worked well. We're going to skip a little bit here and come back to that. But, our tulip production really historically on the farm was, we got to pick the flowers. We've got to ship them to the big box stores. We got into the greenhouse cut flowers. We were doing 2 million stems in the greenhouse. Beautiful crop, loved doing it. There was no margin. And we tried to raise the price a nickel, and the whole order got canceled. And so it was like, and you have one customer, you can't be beholden to one master. And that's the problem with so many of the crops, the agricultural crops, is you've got one master, and it doesn't work. The more you can diversify your risk, the healthier you'll be. So now we kind of pivot, and we focus on customer experience. That's really a big part of what we do. And really, our motto now is experience the beauty. You know, we're about creating memories. The number of people, you know, we've cut back on the amount of flowers that we pick, but the demographics. To me, the best thing about the whole festival is the demographics. To go out there, it's unlike any other. You know, we put a map up of the United States and the world, and it takes us about 1 week to get pins in all 50 states. And by the end of the festival, we get between 130 and 140 countries pinned. And it's just amazing. You know, I do a farm tour out there with my sister now. We drive them out and we talk about agriculture in Oregon. We talk about the farm. We talk about the tulips. And we had a couple of gals from Nigeria that had come here to go to the Tulip Festival. And then they see the rest of this beautiful state. So, it does bring a lot to this state. And I think I'll keep going. But, as in anything, everything changes. Just as your office isn't the same as it was 40 years ago, our Tulip Festivals changes over the years. And we're adapting. Some of the things we used to do, we don't do anymore. We don't need it. And it's just one size doesn't fit all. Things are constantly changing. And we always look post-festival, what worked, what didn't work, what are our revenue streams, anything else we can do. We're constantly doing that. I'm gonna come back to time ticketing though, because for us this has just been the greatest thing since sliced bread. The safety on our local roads. There's less congestion. Lisa can get out of her driveway and go to work now. We like that. The community relationships. I think they'll talk to us now. But the customer experience, instead of sitting in traffic for 2 hours trying to get in on a Saturday afternoon, they drive right in. We lowered the capacity. There's fewer people that come in because we want that experience for them to be able to drive right in, get out of the car, and go enjoy the beauty. There's less stress on the family and our staff. And we can inform. We've got a connection. They've ordered those tickets online. Now we have a connection to them, so we can tell them what to expect when they get out there. This is what's going on. This is what you need to watch for. So they know ahead of time. And, and before this, I was putting traffic management plans together. We were making one of the roads one way. I had to hire companies to do, foot flagging. It was miserable. And that's what we were focused on all the time was parking. And this has taken all that away. We can get out and visit with the people now. I think I've got some numbers on the next one, that the number of people that have visited. We had about 175,000 out there, the 6-week period. But what we did with time ticketing is you can spread the people out. They're not all coming at one particular time. So, and we've had different things that we've changed. So we have a sunrise pass. So we have this beautiful sunrise, Cascade Mountains, Mount Hood. You've probably all seen those sunrise right behind Mount Hood. You can buy a pass for that. I thought the photographers were the rudest people in the world years ago. I'd go out there and they'd see me coming and they'd turn around, and at 8:45, we opened at 9. At 8:45, there'd be this mass exodus. They'd be run into the exit because they didn't want to pay. And it was like, wait a minute, maybe we should legitimize this and let them buy a pass to come in. They are the friendliest people out there now. I see the same ones day after day trying to get that perfect shot, and they visit and they repost for us, and they've got them all over, Facebook and out, and it's great advertising for us. It's great advertising for the state. Although there's one that's circulating right now that's not Oregon. I think it's Japan. You have probably seen that. It says Tulip Field in Oregon. That's not us, but you'll know it when you see it. Anyway, and the other thing we do is, if we see a problem, we try to fix it. So drones, we had trouble with drones when they first came out. And yet we advertised with a drone shot. We thought, what are we doing? So if you want to come in and fly your drone, you can do it at the first 2 hours in the morning when the sun comes up, and then they're out of there. So those that really want to do it and do it right, there's an opportunity to do it, and we sell only in limited number. The other thing we do is 12 and under is free. When my kids were young, the hardest thing is to go somewhere and you break the bank getting in, and then you're trying to feed them, and you're just trying to figure out how you're going to do it. And we wanted families to feel welcome out there. Bring your kids out here. One of the first festivals, I remember that there was a pen across the street, and there was a cow there. And I remember this kid, Mommy, is that a cow? And she looked at the cow and she looked at the kid. She said, I don't know, we have to go ask your daddy. And I'll never forget that because it was like, what do you mean you don't know that that's a cow? So to get people out and to be able to talk to them, and that's, again, time ticking has been great because now I can get out there and visit with more people, and they're always amazed to see the farmer out there, visiting in the field. This year, like I say, diversification of revenue streams is so important. But this year we brought summer flowers. So we did a sunflower field this year, low-keyed. The summer flowers at Wooden Shoe. It's a you-pick, you come out, pick the flowers, walk through the field, enjoy the beauty. And it's sunflowers and other kinds of flowers as well. But we have the resources there. We thought, let's utilize it, spread our risk again, diversify. And then succession. So, as you know, 96% of the farms in the state are family-owned. And we want to keep it that way. And it's not always easy being a family farm. You wouldn't know anything, Josh. But we have rules to return. So if you're going to come back to the farm, I've got 23 nieces, nephews, and my kids. If you're going to come back to the farm, you need to go get a degree in something. Get out of here, go get a degree, and then go work somewhere else for 2 years. And then bring that knowledge back to the farm. And it's the best thing we could have done. Our generation, Dad needed the help on the farm. My brothers went right back to the farm. Worst thing they could have ever done. You don't learn to be an employee. You don't learn the confidence that you can do it yourself, and you don't bring that knowledge back to the farm. So, the importance of agriculture, the real reason we do it, yeah, it's sharing the beauty and all that, but for our family farm, I'd have to say it's the economics. It keeps our family farm in our family. If we didn't have our Tulip Festival, our farm would not survive. There are not the margins on the crops that we grow to sustain a family farm. And you're telling 23, which one of you is going to stay here? The other thing is, that the number of people that say, oh, well, one of the spouses needs to go get a job off the farm because the farm can't sustain it. What an insult. I'm a professional. I went to college. I got a degree. I've worked in this industry for over 40 years. You're telling me that if I have a spouse or my kid, I have to tell my kid that they have to go marry somebody off farm so that they can have benefits? That's an insult, I think. Why can't I diversify on my farm, create that income so that they can stay there and work, and we have enough money for a living wage that we can pay them benefits and health care? I'll stop there. and one size doesn't fit all. Every agritourism, every farm you go to is different. We all do things different. Peter does things different than I do, and, it's just the way it works. But really, for me, on our agritourism, on our farm, it's safety, it's education, accommodation. We welcome everybody. How can we make the porta potties a little more convenient for the handicapped? We go through all of that. How can we accommodate everybody? And that's, really, I just want to welcome you all. I want to invite you all out this spring. Come out and see what it's all about. Learn what we do. We have had 40 years of trial and error. When we hit 30 years, I said, well, it took us 30 years to be an overnight success. It's just, we're constantly trying to improve and do it better. But for me, it's sustaining a family farm and the local economy. So many, I'm going to take a minute, so many of the restaurants around us say, hey, give us a heads up when your festival is going to start. I used to hear this all the time. I'd go to a chamber event. Hey, what's going on? Or they'd have a new employee. What's going on? There's all these people in the restaurant today. Oh, the Tulip Festival started. So it filters out into the local economy. There is a big impact. I know the company stores, Woodburn Outlets there, they get a big influx. We don't take credit for the Christmas backup that they have. That's not our fault. And so often it's always our fault that there's a line of cars up the road. And we hope with time ticking we've eliminated a lot of that. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Barb. Let's turn it over to Samantha.
Okay, well, I wasn't nervous before we started, and now after hearing Barb talk about agritourism, I'm sitting here going, oh no, the only thing I produce is really boring legal memos. So I don't get the joy of bringing people flowers from around the world. But I do want to say thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Samantha Bear. I'm General Counsel for the Oregon Property Owners Association. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, but I want to just first say thank you so much for allowing this presentation and for inviting us up here. When I first started in the advocacy space, these two people here were some of the first people I ever met. Back at the time at my farm, when I was at the Farm Bureau, and so it's very full circle to be sitting here today and having this conversation, and just thank you for giving them a platform and giving us an opportunity to have this conversation. So again, I am General Counsel of the Oregon Property Owners Association. We are a multifaceted advocacy organization. Myself and my law partner Dave are both land use attorneys by trade. Our organization was founded back in 1989. It was formerly known as Oregonians in Action. What we do is we fight and defend private property rights across the state. We fight for, and defend private property rights across the state. We represent landowners from every corner of the state, whether you're a farmer, a rancher, a timber producer, a homeowner, a home builder. If you own land in the state of Oregon, we work and represent your interests, your private property rights. And we were founded by timber and ag back in the 80s and have always worked with farmers. And kind of our ethos around representing farmers is pretty simple. We believe that freedom means opportunity and opportunity means prosperity. So if folks like Barb, the law allows them the opportunity to do what they need to do and make those adjustments to be successful, those are the type of policies that we support and the type of work that we do. While we've always worked in ag, over the last year, I've gotten the immense pleasure of working with a group of farmers like Barb and others around the state who do agritourism, some form of agritourism on their property. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that the word agritourism is kind of nebulous. It means many different types of things to many different types of people. And there's various ways in our land use laws where folks can legally do agritourism. So it's a really big bucket term. The reason why we got involved is we also have a legal center where myself and, again, my law partner Dave actually represent landowners. We represent them at local government hearings. We help them apply for permits. We defend people in court. And what happened is we started getting calls to our office from folks who have agritourism permits where anonymous complaints were being filed, or they had they went in to do an expansion, and they went in to do something different, and they had a conversation with their planning director, and they just started getting a lot of pushback, or there was some interesting interpretations in how our land use regulations around agritourism were being interpreted at the local level. And so that kind of sparked us to say, maybe we need to pull a group together and start talking to these folks, because what we're here, it keeps popping up, and that's just kind of the nature of our work. An issue will just pop up over and over again, and we pull together and have some sort of concerted effort. So through this group, we've got about 12, I would say, of the largest, more agritourism-focused farms in the state. And what's really interesting to me in this group is both the diversity and the commonality. So we have folks that are multi-generational farmers who are growing well over 1,000 acres, who are growing multiple commodities. They do both wholesale, and they have a farm stand, and they do certain events, down to very, smaller farmers who are within the first 5 years of being a farm and are trying to do farm-to-table dinners or different things to earn additional income because they want to do regenerative farming practices and they have higher costs that they need to overcome. So a vast difference between how they do things and why they do things. But there's a couple common things I just wanted to highlight. One, every single person that we work with loves farming. They are full-time farmers. That's what they do, and they love it, and they want to stay doing it. Doing agritourism is a component of their business that allows them to tap into a different market, sell their commodities in a different way, and be successful financially. But they are farmers. The other thing I wanted to add is, while they're very motivated and excited to be here, they're frustrated. There's a lot of frustration out there of people who do this because they generally don't feel supported at times. We do have a complaint-driven system within our land use planning system, which creates tension for permittees. We have our land use laws in this area are also vague and unclear. So we saw variability of people within the same county with the same type of permit, which permits saying two separate things. One person got the direction that they could include ticket sales into their, 75% versus 25% income limit. One other person's was said they couldn't include ticket sales. One person's allowed to sell prepared foods, and another person's permit flat out says they can't sell prepared foods out of their farm stand. So a lot of frustration and variability. And the last thing that we heard is this feeling of being really disconnected from the public. They felt like they were struggling and putting in all of this effort to put on these events, and they kind of felt like almost, but then they were dealing with these issues on the back end with their county or with the state. And so it was like they felt like they were doing this amazing service that people loved, but then they weren't necessarily getting that sense of safety and support from the regulators that they were dealing with. And so what I asked them to do was, when you do your next farm to table dinner, when you have your next class, when you do your next thing, and this was over the summer, start talking to folks about this. Start talking to your customers about this. And many of them did. And what they came back and they said was, wow, so many people came to us and said, I had no idea it was this hard to farm in this state. I had no idea the hoops that you guys have to jump through to put all of this on for us. We had no idea that Oregon has lost over 2,000 farms since the last census. We didn't know it was this bad. We want you to be here next year. What can we do to support you? And so that cued us in of like, okay, I think the general public, as Barb mentioned, when you go out to Barb's place, it is pure joy. Most people are loving, except for Barb, she's stressed, but everyone else, it's joy. And people love these types of experiences. They love getting to have this different consumer interface, and they love getting to talk to the farmer that's growing the food and actually getting to ask them questions. Because what Barb said, that is often the first time so many kids ever make it out onto a farm. They have no idea. And so that led us to create what's called the Keep Oregon Farming campaign. It's an informational grassroots campaign. If you go to www.keeporegonfarming.com, you can see the website. And it was put out there to kind of bridge the gap between what folks who do agritourism are experiencing, some of the barriers that we have in our land use planning system, the state of agriculture, and how normal folks in town can weigh in and be supportive. And in a matter of weeks, we had a letter to the governor asking for the governor to please be supportive of agritourism, be supportive of our farm families. It received well over 1,000 signatures. I think we had and there was hundreds of farms that signed on to that letter, but way more just normal people from the city of Portland, from the city of Eugene, from all over, asking the governor of the state of Oregon to please do more to support our farm families. That letter was delivered to her and her team. We have subsequently had conversations with her in her office. And so I will say, between that effort and this presentation here today, I'm feeling, for the first time in a long time, really encouraged that folks in this space are going to be getting more support. And I feel really encouraged that we are going to be able to work through some of the issues in our regulations that are well-intentioned, but can potentially create barriers for the economic success for many of our farm families. That's a little bit of background of what we've been doing in this space. If I don't know how much time I have, 5 minutes. Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to take the opportunity to potentially address some of the things that we talked that was mentioned earlier, because I think that when we talk about bringing the general public out into EFU zoned land, which is often very far away with rural infrastructure, to what Peter was talking about and Barb, there can be issues with traffic. There can be issues with parking. There can be impacts if it's not done correctly and it's not managed correctly. But I think that those are concerns that exist, frankly, with any business, with most businesses, and there certainly can be overcome. The two things, though, and also the other thing I want to add is, in terms of if there are any agricultural businesses or business practices that are causing actual harm to nearby agricultural operations, we do have remedies under the law that can be addressed. The right to farm does not protect farmers who are doing things where their farm practices cause harm or injury to nearby farms or nearby farm products. So we do have those remedies. The one thing I want to address that Peter brought up earlier, because I've heard it several times now from Mike and others in front of this board, is the idea of land values. And I'd like to just slightly reframe that. So I also do a lot of work in the housing space. And it is true that when you improve property, when you do have a successful business, when you make improvements to it, that is going to increase the value of that property. But that's equity for that farmer. That is something that I think we should be celebrating. If Barb has done all of the things that she has done to create such a successful business and to create this amazing farm that she has, I think she's entitled to that increase in value. Where I also agree, though, with Peter is that we do have a land value crisis in this state. If you look, and what we really have is we have a crisis of young people who do not have the purchasing power to buy real estate. And that exists inside our urban growth boundary, and it exists outside of our urban growth boundaries. The state has done a really good job of acknowledging this when we talk about our housing and homelessness crisis, when we're talking about young people can't afford to buy homes on residentially zoned lots inside the urban growth boundary because the price of the land, the price of the home is so far outside of their purchasing power. Where the state has not done a very good job is addressing this outside of our urban growth boundaries in our rural areas, where we do have young people who are also not able to afford the value of agriculturally zoned land to build their home and to run their business. Where I think Peter and I are going to disagree are potentially on the solutions to that problem. I don't think that the solution to that is capping or preventing farmers from being successful in their agritourism businesses or their on-farm processing businesses or whatever they need to do to improve and increase the value of their land and their business. But what I think we could do is have a significant amount of conversation and investment of how we can financially support and increase the purchasing power of younger farmers, new farmers, and young people in general. And we could also look at some of the barriers that we have in our planning system as well that does prevent young people from being able to become new farmers. We have an 80-acre minimum lot size requirement. We have gross income requirements that young farmers have to meet before they're able to even build a home on their own land. So those are several things in place that, while I think they're well-intentioned to keep farmland, they actually make it quite difficult for young people to buy property and build their own dreams. So with that, I don't have much more to say other than that I very much appreciate being up here, and I think what you've highlighted at the beginning through your resolution is such an important thing, in that I think we all in this room love and support agriculture. We also understand that ag economics are shifting and changing, and people need to be able to do what they need to do to stay in business. I think the crux is that we're probably going to have different ideas on the solutions there. I will say from my organization's standpoint, we're really focused on pushing forth policies that are supportive of farmers instead of supporting policies that preserve farmland, because if you don't have farmers, in our opinion, you don't have farmland. And how a lot of our regulatory system, particularly in the land use planning system, has been interpreted and enforced in the last however many decades, it's really farm preservation, farmland focused. And I think this issue with agritourism is such an interesting and great way for us to kind of maybe change and reshape looking at policies that support farmers and not just farmland.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate that. Gordon Howard, you're on the line. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you know, we've had some volume issues. Can you just speak as loudly as comfortable? That'd be great.
I will do that. Thank you, everyone. I'm Gordon Howard. I'm with the Department of Land Conservation Development. I'm the Community Services Division Manager. Apologize, I'm not there in person. I'm currently in the state of Arizona visiting my mother-in-law for the holidays, and looking around at the in this area, in the Phoenix area, at the hundreds of thousands of former agricultural land that's been obliterated by urban sprawl. It makes me happy to know that I'm from Oregon and know that the arguments and disagreements we have are on a scale that is within a very high bar, I should say. And I am here in place of Hillary Foote, who is not available. She's our farm and forest specialist. She's an actual farmer in Tillamook County. I am not a farmer. I do not have any specialized experience in that. My main experience with farming, quite frankly, is agritourism. My wife and I love to pick berries and make berry jam. It's amazing how much sugar goes into that, but it sure tastes good. Was going through pictures in my photo album of my then 2-year-old daughter either hugging or strangling a goat at Lee's Berry Farm in Tualatin. Unclear from the picture which was happening. Another picture of a German relative of mine with my then teenage daughters visiting a pumpkin patch on Sylvie Island many years ago. Other pictures of picking apples, getting apples in Hood River to make applesauce, homemade applesauce. And I've also had the pleasure of visiting a couple times the Wooden Shoe Tulip Festival in Woodburn, a beautiful, beautiful location. I took my parents there once. They're in their 80s. They were in the 80s at the time, and they said they didn't like it because there were too many colors. And I kind of looked at them. I said, "Are you my parents?" I'm not sure what was going on there, but had a wonderful time there. I don't have a slideshow for you today, so I apologize for that. But putting aside my personal life, Department of Land Conservation Development and our Land Conservation Development Commission, appointed by the governor, is responsible for implementing the statewide planning program. There are 19 of those statewide planning goals, and Goal 3, and I always say that there are 19 statewide planning goals, and that no goal is, they're all supposed to be looked at as equal, but some goals are more equal than others, to quote from George Orwell's Animal Farm. And Goal 3, I think, is perhaps more equal than other. The agricultural goal, which reads basically to preserve and maintain agricultural lands. As Samantha pointed out, it doesn't say farm populations. It doesn't say anything about that. It talks about agricultural lands. It references also later some state statutes, the most notable ORS 215.243, which is to enhance the agricultural economy of the state. Now, economy is more than just dollars and cents. It's also people, but it is a major portion dollars and cents. And so I think that it's safe to say that there has been a point of view that the point of preserving farmland in Oregon is for the preservation of our farm economy, which the exact size of which you're more expert than I am, but I know it's I've heard either number 2 or number 3 in the state. And really the issue is where actual people fit into that farm economy, and I think it's a key point. Another interesting point, and despite the statutory language and the statewide planning goal, I note that 19% of Oregon's population lives outside of an urban growth boundary, and our goal 14 of our statewide planning program requires all 241 cities in the state to establish an urban growth boundary to prevent things like what happened in Arizona from happening in Oregon. And most people are supposed to live there. I think the program, I always say that rural populations, if they're not involved actively in farming or forestry, are kind of, in a sense, grudgingly tolerated in Oregon by our statewide planning program, yet 19% of our state's population lives outside of an urban growth boundary. So there are some anomalies there that are kind of are interesting to think about. Regarding agritourism, our agency has had a lot of things going on with that subject in the last few years. I would point out, many of you know this already, I'm sure, that in 2011, the state legislature adopted, as part of its statute, ORS 215.213, which I remember one state senator once said it was Oregon's agricultural statewide zoning ordinance, because that statutory provision reads like a local zoning ordinance at times, what uses are allowed and under what conditions. They put forward a very detailed, after a lot of wrangling and discussion, I know because I was working for the legislature back then, a very detailed provisions regarding agritourism in ORS 215.283. And they set forth all sorts of standards involving events for a year, how long those events could last, the number of people could go there, whether they involve permanent or temporary buildings. And they used some language that, even though they tried to get into a lot of detail, some of that language was pretty subjective, and it's been subject to some court rulings since then. Excuse me. And we were getting, as an agency, local governments, counties around the state, were being asked, dealing with a lot of situations involving the kind of controversies that Samantha mentioned, and that you're aware of, where people are, individuals are challenging permits for agritourism facilities and how to interpret those standards. There have been some court decisions that said, for instance, at one point, there's one bit of language in the statute that says the agritourism use must be, at a certain size, must be incidental and subordinate to the existing farm use of a tract. And then later, for larger numbers, up to 18 events a year, it says that in addition to being incidental and subordinate, they have to be necessary to support commercial farm uses or the commercial agricultural activities in the area. Well, there were some court cases that interpreted those standards, and some local governments were aware of them and some weren't. And so as part of our look at all of our rules and standards regarding agricultural land, we have administrative rules that implement state statutes. Our commission gave us direction to essentially take those court cases and put them into the rules so that all local governments would have those standards going forward when they reviewed individual projects, and not just for agritourism, but for other issues as well, such as how to interpret what's called the farm impacts test and home occupations and things like that. But we spent a lot of time on agritourism, and we had a rulemaking advisory committee that looked at that. Samantha was on that, and some farmers. Mike McCarthy, who's been mentioned, was also on that group. And However, when we came forward with the rules that our commission considered this fall, we got an awful lot of testimony from agritourism interests indicating that they were too restrictive, and maybe they are too restrictive, but they are the current status of the law. And so our commission last month, at this point, earlier this month, adopted those rules, which essentially put the case law standards that have been set by courts into our rules as well, and so they'd be uniformly applied around the state. And to those who would say, why don't you read, those rules are too restrictive or they're not restrictive enough, we heard that as well. Our response really is that the legislature spent a lot of time in 2011 writing this statute. They gave pretty specific direction. Other times, occasionally, the legislature gives a general policy directive and tells our agency to write rules to implement it and fill in the details and come up with standards. They did that, for example, in the housing area in 2019 when they passed a law saying that ending exclusive single-family zoning in Oregon, but they said to our agency, go write the rules. We spent 2 years writing rules and with a big rulemaking advisory committee on that. In this situation with agritourism, the legislature spoke pretty clearly what they wanted in 2011. And at this point, our commission, our agency certainly and our commission believe that changes to that, if the legislature wants to change that, it should be the legislature that changes that. And if they want to direct our agency to look more closely at this issue and help local governments recalibrate how agritourism activities go on agricultural land, the legislature can do that. But if they aren't, I think our rules should follow the direction the legislature is given. And so that's where we are at this point. The rules were, as I said, adopted by our commission earlier this month. They're in place. They reflect the current status of case law and the statutes, and we hope that they make it clearer for local governments how they are supposed to review these agritourism permits so that there isn't the kind of anomalies or discrepancies that that we hear about from local governments. One of the points of having some uniform law on the subject is to prevent that from happening and give more certainty to applicants for agritourism when they go to their local county and ask for a permit and look at the standards for that. So with that, I'm pretty much completed with my presentation, so I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. And you're in my home state, so I get what you're talking about there as far as agriculture is concerned. What we'll do is open it up to Q&A and any comments from the board. I know I have some questions, but this has been very, very helpful to hear it at the same time. It's a very complex, very complicated, and just appreciate everybody's time and spending with us on this. So I will open it up for comments or questions. Okay. Oh, go right ahead, Dr. Lopez.
Miguel Lopez for the record. Quick question for the farming families that presented today. Do you feel that in telling your story, you have found a new commodity to help you keep your farms operating in the future?
Absolutely. I can tell you that we would not have a family farm if we didn't have agritourism. There's just no margin in grass seed. I mean, we've grown 100 different crops on our farm looking for that home run and how to do it. We were in potatoes for a long time, 800-acre potatoes for Frito-Lay, till they went in and decided they wanted to do a declining contract and they only wanted one grower. So just different things we've dealt with over the years between the canneries, the grass seed companies now, price of wheat. Agritourism supports our family farm.
It's such a small part of our operation, and actually for the past 3 years, my wife has been running it as a fundraiser for Jackson Street Youth Shelter and ABC House in our local community. We're diversified enough, we're lean enough, been at it long enough, we're well capitalized. We don't spend a lot of money. I still drive my dad's 1990s pickup. And we've been able to do well because of our diversification. But we're in a very different situation. We're not supporting near as many people as Barb's family is. But I mean, but it still is a challenge. It still is a challenge to do it. But at some point there's also going to be a limit hit at how much agritourism there's a population to support.
I've got a question, and this may be for multiple people on the panel, and it goes back to Gordon, your rulemaking, and I know we as an agency don't, we stay in our wheelhouse. At the same time, when we look at impacts to agriculture, it's important for us to just understand ramifications. And I'd like to just address, and I didn't track testimony and all through that, but being involved in other situations where policy could have been driven by litigation. A lot of times litigation is dealt with in forum shopping and figuring out different things, and it may not at the end of the day be the best necessary answer. And I'd like folks to address, was that because of what was being proposed? And you guys were given directive, understandably, to say, okay, let's look at this litigation and come up with next steps. What were some of the concerns, or what are some of the concerns going forward with what came out of that?
Well, yeah, thank you.
I did serve as a member of the RAC. And I will say two things. Unfortunately, members of the RAC were not given the opportunity to have that conversation. By the time the RAC was started, there was already the directive from the commission and draft language that was before us. That conversation, and Gordon's welcome to correct me here, but that primarily those conversations took place, which was what was called in what they call the technical advisory committee. That was a smaller group that met for several months and really were able to have those policy conversations. When I got on the RAC and we were looking at, for example, case law out of very famous case called Stop the Dump, which deals with the farm impacts test, and since that's a Oregon Supreme Court case, and when that Oregon Supreme Court case was decided, it was met with extremely mixed reviews from people within the legal community because it essentially codified a standard to meet the farm impacts test, which is an extremely high burden for anyone who is applying for a conditional use permit to meet. And really, since that case has come out, many of us who represent farmers and who represent applicants have been saying, I don't think that this is really fair. There's a lot of concerns with what this test is, and it imposes kind of an undue burden on people who are trying to do many uses that are supportive of their farms. And when we and myself and a representative of the Farm Bureau raised those concerns in the RAC and wanted to have those policy conversations, we weren't able to because the commission had already directed the agency to codify those specific cases. And so I will agree with Gordon, though, that a lot of that is outside of the agency's hands. A lot of this comes from statute, and we do have to have many statutory changes. I disagree with the department's position that the best way to handle that is to codify some of these cases, because I don't think that the cases necessarily do make things more clear, because judges aren't planners. Judges write in a way that is very high level, and so taking some of their words directly out of opinions and popping them into an administrative rule that then planners at the local level have to apply and farmers have to interpret when making applications can actually make some very confusing standards for people to try to apply for or apply under.
Gordon, do you have anything to add? And then the two panelists.
I think Samantha is correct that we were given direction by our commission to not strike out into new territory on these issues. We were that the point of this part of our charge was to there was a lot of confusion from local governments on how these things that were set by judges in their opinions, or LUBA referees in some cases, would be reviewed by local governments. Some local governments had contrary code provisions, some didn't. Sometimes the issue would be litigated based upon whether there was someone to litigate it. I mean, something would get approved that didn't follow the law, but it's the old thing: if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did the tree really fall? I mean, that we see that a lot with things like the farm impacts test. So putting that into law, putting that into the statute, or administrative rules based on the statute, you could argue too that the judges are interpreting when they provide that guidance. They are interpreting the actual statute. So you can argue that that the judges got it wrong, I suppose, but our system of statutory and common law says otherwise. I think that the other alternative for our commission would be to strike out and say, well, we're gonna look at this issue entirely new, and we're going to open it up and consider everything. And I think that the point we were trying to do is to make it easier for local governments and more efficient and fairer to applicants for these kind of permits and other kind of permits under today's rules. And if the legislature wants to change those rules by amending the statutes, which Samantha acknowledges a lot of these problems come from the statutes, or what she perceives as problems comes from the statutes, then it's up to the legislature to give us that direction. The legislature could also direct our agency to strike out and look at this issue afresh. But our agency and commission don't feel comfortable doing that without getting some, when the legislature, especially on something like agritourism, has spoken pretty as clearly as legislatures can on agritourism. It's not, in a sense, our agency's place or our commission's place to kind of go off in a different direction. So that's kind of what we're dealing with here as far as our perspective.
Okay, thank you. So you were basically fulfilling what the commission had asked you to do for that analysis, and I understand what you're talking about, to not to get ahead of your skis with the legislature, basically, is I think what I've heard you say.
I think a bit more directly, yes, you're correct.
Okay. Other comments, questions, or other panel members?
Well, I'll just make a couple comments here. Samantha's right that a lot of these problems come from uneven applications amongst the counties, and inconsistent applications from amongst the counties. It also comes from a lack of enforcement of the existing rules. Has become a problem. And I would strongly disagree with Samantha on Stop the Dump case. The Stop the Dump case finally put some teeth in that language that's always been there, that it cannot, and I'm not going to get this right, but it cannot force a significant change in farming practices or a significant increase in cost. And that provision has been ignored forever. And when that Stop the Dump case, they finally interpreted it the way I think it should have been interpreted.
Other comments, questions? Yes.
Eric Orm. My first question is for Barb. And I ask you because I've been out there a few times. Everything that you do out there, you fall within the current rules as they're written?
When we started this 40 years ago, I would go in and talk to the the planner at Clackamas County, and I'd sit down. What are we doing? What do I need to change? His stock answers: you're doing great. You're selling direct to the public. You're good. Same with Jim Johnson. Jim Johnson, hey, we're charging. We have to charge to maintain. We're leaving our crop in the field, so they're buying that bouquet of flowers for everybody to enjoy. Is that okay? Yeah, you can count that, and you're all good. So, I'm one of those, I hate to go with hat in hand to the county and say, what else do I need to be doing? Because I'm looking for no. And that's not what I'm looking for. I want to keep going. And for them to tell me all of a sudden no. We dealt with the traffic. We had meetings with them when it got so bad, and we did some traffic management plans. Sam actually helped me with that. Jim Johnson was in on that. So that, we try to deal with the issues, but to say that am I compliant with all the rules and regulations, I have no idea. I want to go sit in my tractor and be out in the field. I'm not a policy wonk, and I don't understand all the rules. So at what point, at 40, when I used to talk to the planner, he was good. And again, it's a complaint-driven system. We work hard with our neighbors. We adopt, we just do a lot of things to try and embrace the community. So
have you been told no on any ideas that you've wanted to do?
Have not. We have voluntarily pulled some that we felt, we did a nighttime haunt. We did a corn maze and a pumpkin patch. Different demographics than the tulips. I was spoiled with the tulips. I didn't like people having to take their kid to the pumpkin patch. And we did a nighttime haunt, and it was phenomenal. People still ask me when we're going to bring it back. We had a pterogator and a zombie hunt and a corn maze haunt, and safety was the big thing. So we put them in a cow train. We could take a set number of people because we didn't want any rogue haunters, and we had a path cut out through the maze, and we'd haunt them. We had the graveyard and the clowns and the whole bit. It was so much fun. But when you go out at 6 the next morning to clean up and you're picking up alcohol bottles and you're out on these country roads thinking, if one of these people leave here and kill a neighbor, is this really worth it? And we pulled the plug. It was a phenomenal event. People enjoyed it. But, again, it comes back to safety. What's safe to do out there? And, we've even, during the Tulip Festival, we've had so many people that we used to have the tractor and trailer. Well, people don't watch their kids. Mm-hmm. And we have a gator and some tram cars now that we use. If you get run over with that, you're probably going to live. But if my tractor runs over one of these kids, they're probably not. So, our main focus really on all our agritourism is it's safe. Are we educating people? Are we getting the people off the road? That customer experience. That's really what we're after. And, that's, to me, an agritourism facility. We have it all wrong. Oh, you can only do this many events or that. One, is it safe? Can you get them off the road? Do you have it so everybody's welcome? Do you have porta potties, the handicap porta potties? What's your gravel? What's your access? What's all of that? To me, that's more important than, you did 18 events. No, you can only do 16 or whatever it is. To me, we kind of lean towards the ridiculous. And it's like, why? There's got to be a simpler way. In my simple brain, I'm thinking, well, why doesn't the ODA? We go to a national NAFTMA conference, North American Farm Direct Marketing Association, and we do tours of other states. It's amazing what some of these places allow. And then we come back to Oregon, and nope, can't do that. Can't have people out here. Well, I'm sorry, but the urban growth boundary, I live between Woodburn and Molalla, and they just expanded the urban growth boundary in Molalla. And 211 is just like a freeway anymore. And I used to, when my kids were in high school, I wouldn't let them go out on 211 and Meridian because it was so dangerous. And now we add all that traffic, but anytime there's an accident, it's the tulip farm. They just have too many people out there. We always take the fall for it. So we get a little salty about some of that. And I lost my train of thought, so I'm going to shut up.
No, you're okay. I just have a comment and then a question for Samantha. So myself this is a comment to Samantha about land prices and pricing farmers, young farmers especially I'm a beginning farmer. I've been doing it for a little over 20 years, but I still consider myself a first generation beginning farmer. It is tough. Not everybody's going to be able to afford a piece of land. I actively look for properties all over the Pacific Northwest, and it's expensive everywhere, not just Oregon. In our local county, things like development, you're right, if I make my property cleaner, better, it's worth more. And But if my neighbor puts a solar project on his, and I'm a private property guy, I really believe in private property, and so it leads me to kind of a litmus test at some point to where, are we preserving agricultural land, or are we building and increasing value of property? If my neighbor builds a solar panel or puts a solar farm on, automatically my land value just doubled. But it's only good if I want to sell it. If I want to continue just to farm it and leave it to my kids, then I'm leaving a higher value property to them to do with what they please. I guess my question for you is and I don't want to be naive in thinking if we can do all sorts of things, whether it's from Peter's small pumpkin patch to Barb's, I mean, it's a big deal. What can't, I mean, is it just the restaurants or on-farm type restaurant type situation event, or the VRBOs? Where is that line, I guess, where I'm confused, I guess, so.
Of what is...
What is, I guess, your biggest issue?
Okay. I'm going to take a couple things. I'd like to add on to what Barb is saying, but it parlays into what you're asking me. So when we're talking about land use regulations and the pantheon of what could be agritourism, we're looking at several different statutes scattered throughout Chapter 215. You can do agritourism through what Gordon was talking about as an agritourism event permit. You can do agritourism through a farm stand. You can do it as a home occupation, a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. Peter had a whole chart on it earlier. There's several different legal pathways forward with several different permits that you can get to do agritourism. Some of those permits come with conditions related to public health and safety and the core things that Barb is talking about. Some of those regulations have absolutely nothing to do with public health and safety. And I'll give you just one simple example. I had a case, and I'm going to say random county somewhere in Oregon, because I don't want to identify the county. I don't want to throw them under the bus. And this person was a dairyman. They did tours for kids to teach them how a dairy works. They did milking classes, and they did that through a farm stand permit, which they are allowed to do, and to sell tickets to those activities. They had an issue with their county planner because in how they had marketed what, and in communications between the county and the planner of like, what do those tours really entail? The farmer said, well, I just want to teach kids about how dairies work. I want to teach kids about agriculture. And the planner did what the planner is supposed to do, which is look at their code and their statute and says, well, you're only supposed to be doing that if you're promoting the sale of farm products. And unfortunately, teaching kids about agriculture isn't selling them a farm product. So therefore, that technically doesn't comply. These are the type of issues we're talking about. We're really not talking about parking and traffic management. If that was the crux of where we were at, that would be a much simpler conversation. We're talking about very specific things and statutes that have nothing to do with public health or safety, or really the realities of farming at all, that are just being interpreted and misinterpreted. So that could be, to your earlier question, you can technically have agritourism, and that could be at such a scale of, we're talking about very large wineries with large, on-farm hospitality operations. We could be talking about something as small as Peter's U-Pick operation. Unfortunately, to what we were talking about earlier, there's so many different ways that these are permitted with so many different code interpretations. There's not like a clear line in the sand of how make some of these conflicts go away. And at the end of the day, I'm a private property rights representative. My position is I don't necessarily care what type of farm you want to do, what type of commodity you want to grow. I just want you to be successful at doing it. And again, I think we would be going down the wrong path if our concerns about land values and other people not being able to have those same opportunities come in some sort of form of regulatory control. The equivalent of that we have in the land use space is rent control for housing. And that has generally not worked very well. There's been a lot of concerns about that, and it raises several constitutional questions and other issues related to our constitutionally protected property rights and free market. So my position and what I would urge you to do is I totally agree that we do have a problem with, if you talk about land values and you talk about young people not having purchasing power, how can we increase young people's purchasing power? What can we do in terms of financing to support them? What barriers can we break down for them so that when they are able to earn, when they are able to buy their property, they're able to earn more? What other regulations can we unwind to make it easier for them to stay in business? Not capping the opportunities for people to earn a living on their property because it might price other people out down the road.
Egg overtime.
Amen. I mean, to what Barb was talking about earlier, when you ask, are you in compliance? I advise people on compliance, and farmers are the hardest people to advise on compliance because they have a spider web of regulations over the top of them at every single one point in time. It is truly unbelievable the amount that they have to navigate on a daily basis just to stay in business.
Other yes, Director Boyer.
So, Barbara Boyer, Barb, I'm really happy to hear that you have not been said no to you. I feel like that's an accomplishment in the land use system, so thank you. So your parking lot is permanent?
So when I got out of college, I went back to, the last thing I was ever going to do was go farm with my brothers. Didn't want to do that. No way in heck was I going to ever do that. And so my grandfather had started a rhododendron nursery on the outskirts of Portland at 39th and Powell. That's where my mom grew up. She married my dad, wanted to marry a dentist. Anyway, he wanted to farm. So they bought the farm. And when my grandfather died, they moved field-growing rhododendrons to our farm. And we started growing rhododendrons there. We were the largest rhododendron grower in the world at one point in time. And after college, I went to work for my uncle. And I managed the rhododendrons. Loved it, went to all the garden shows, but took over as manager there. After a few years, he didn't have an exit plan, and so my sister and I were going to buy the nursery from him. So we'd ship 100 semi-trucks with rhododendrons, mostly to the East Coast, but we had an area that we'd put sawdust in. It had been a pasture when my uncle had bought that property. It was a pasture, and he put sawdust in there and river rock in there for roadways, and it just was kind of ruined it. And that's what we use for our parking.
Okay, so thank you. Long answer for yes or no. And how many acres is it?
Well, we farm about...
No, the parking lot.
There's probably, 10.
Okay.
We plant perennial ryegrass. Perennial ryegrass is our backup, because if the weather's nice enough that we're going to get a lot of people, the perennial ryegrass is going to be solid enough, if it's not a first-year crop, that we can park people on our perennial ryegrass. Then we don't ruin that field, but then we can also harvest that crop.
Do you harvest it every year?
We do, but we rotate. We're on a rotation, so
Right.
we've got clover seed and other things.
So in the parking lot, you get the benefit of special use.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
we've got that, and not all of that parking lot. Some of it's grass. We make some of it as grass, and then.
Okay, thank you. And then, what was my other question for you?
Right now we have honeybees on it because we have a company that takes them down to the almonds, and he stages them on our parking. So there's multiple use. We always park equipment on the off season there.
And then Samantha, for you, you use the word nebulous when it comes to the phrase agritourism. I'm not a fan of that phrase at all. I think we need to change it. It's kind of like climate change. It leads people to riot, the people who don't quite understand it. So has your organization come up with a definition for agritourism?
No, and I would potentially think that might not be the best idea. We do have, since what Gordon mentioned in 2011, the legislature put into state statute, it's in 215, that's 4, and it talks about agritourism event permits. And so the legislature has somewhat codified that. And I don't necessarily know how you could define it, and I don't necessarily know what the benefit is. People have brought this up to me before, and I don't really know if that would solve much, because I don't necessarily think the confusion is, or the concerns are about what the activity is. I think the concerns are often just about the impact of the activities, no matter what you call it.
And then you talked about the frustration of the multi-pathways to a permit. So do you have any alternatives?
I like the multi-pathways for permitting personally, and most of the planners that I work with also like the multi-pathway options for permitting. Most of, and this is kind of what Barb talked about, depends on where you go in the state, and it depends on what you're doing. A lot of times you go into a planning office and you feel like the immediate answer is no. It's no unless you can prove X, Y, Z, QPRS, 214, whatever. And their starting place is no. Their starting place is not yes. I also work with many planners whose starting place is yes. They want to help people at the counter. They want to help people succeed, and they want to help. They like things that Barb are doing. They like having this in their community, and they see the overall economic and societal benefit. And so if they can't necessarily say, from a customer service standpoint, they like the ability to say, okay, realistically, you're not going to be able to do this at a home occupation, and it's not really appropriate as a home occupation, but you can do it as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use, and they like those options. What I would like, my solution is pretty simple. Take it back down to public health and safety. Take it back down to the core things that can really impact people and impact neighbors, and take it out of the context of many of the things that our legislation related to agritourism are about, which has nothing to do with public health or safety.
And then one last comment. All my years of studying right to farm, I thought it was nuisance and trespass and not compatibility. So
that's correct.
Thank you.
All right, we have about 4 minutes left, but
Miguel Lopez for the record. I can't remember which one you talked about a little bit, and it had to do around the fact of complaints and anonymous complaints. When those complaints have come in, the anonymous ones, is there a way of finding out whether or not it came from a fellow farmer? Or is it more than anything from somebody who lives within the city limits and is complaining about the noise that they're hearing from the farm adjacent to it?
In my experience, it depends on how the local government wants to handle making those complaints known. But more often than not, the landowner has absolutely no idea where the complaint came from. There's no standing requirements for making a complaint, meaning you don't have to prove that you live next door to actually make the complaint. You don't have to prove that you've been actually harmed to make the complaints. For example, it also depends on how the county is going to handle that. We have situations going on right now related to bed and breakfasts and short-term rentals as a very hot topic in the farm zone. And you have situations where you have organizations that are filing dozens and hundreds of anonymous complaints. They're just going on what's it called, VRBO, and they're going on Airbnb, and they're plugging in addresses and filing complaints that those are illegal short-term rentals without having to do any research or any understanding of whether or not that's actually true or not. So most of the time, and the other thing is there's no penalty for making an anonymous complaint against someone if you're wrong.
I just added, as my experience as a local government planner, almost all cities and counties have complaints on anonymity. I'd also point out that cities and counties vary quite a bit on how they respond to complaints. There's a lot of discretion in there as well. In fact, during our rulemaking, we got complaints from some people saying, from one of our members saying that local governments weren't responding to complaints properly. So it's kind of a wild west of activity there when in terms of local government code enforcement issues.
Okay, we had just one more minute, Barb.
I thought we were going till 3 on the agenda. Is what it looked
No, I
like to
think
me.
it was for 90 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
But-
So to Barb, sorry, I knew I had one last question. So your scale is not very common in the state of Oregon.
No, it's not.
And I think you mentioned 175,000 cars a year. People, okay. And so you do charge for parking?
No, we charge per person. We used to charge for parking. We switched it. We switched it a number of years ago so we could have a better hand of who came in.
Okay. So I'm curious what have you gone through an audit of a 75-25% rule?
No,
with
because
anybody?
Jim Johnson's assured me that admission, because we're leaving our flowers in the field for the public, is part of that 75.
Okay, I'm just curious. I never know what that looks like. I don't even know if it's ever happened. So
If it wasn't,
very curious.
It would throw it out because that is a big part
Okay.
of what we have.
Thank you.
Can I add on that? Because that was actually a response of what is, for example, the biggest issue that my organization is looking at, and it's exactly what Barb's talking about, the 25-75. So one of the more, and sorry, I don't know if I have time to even respond.
Let's do this. I think it's important enough. We're going on our tour, and I think it's because I don't know if I understand the 75-25 rule when I've attempted to, and I'm not sure all of our board members do. So let's take a kind of little 101 that might be helpful.
I can be brief, and I can also follow up with information on anyone. So we've talked about how you can apply for an agritourism event permit under the statute that Gordon has said. I will say most people don't have those because they're not mandatory for counties to offer. It's a sub-2 conditional use. Most counties have not gone through the effort of adopting those provisions into their local land use code, and they don't have to. So how most folks do promotional activities or events is through a farm stand permit, which is how local governments have to offer those and allow people to have farm stands and get farm stand permits. So what that statute essentially says is you can do promotional activities and sell incidental items. So think like hats, merchandise, other things for your farm out of your farm stand. And you can also do promotional activities that are reasonably intended to attract customers out to your farm, have them buy things from the farm stand. So that's where you see a lot of farm-to-table dinners, harvest festivals, flower festivals. If you can do these sorts of promotional activities and attract people out to your farm, which again, most farms don't live anywhere with foot traffic. It's not like people walking home to the grocery store after the end of the work in town. You've got to drive out to go there. So the legislature gave people that opportunity to do agritourism events. The caveat is that there's several limitations on how those events can be done. Whether they can be done inside farm stand structures, what type of events can be done. But the biggest restriction is that sales, income, fees earned from those promotional activities and your incidental items cannot exceed more than 25% of your total sales of your farm stand. And so that was put in place, from my understanding, to make sure that you don't have carnivals or shopping malls or grocery stores out in the middle of farm stand or farmland, that it's remaining farm first. But the reality is it imposes a really arbitrary income restriction that people have to operate in. And what we see and what we have seen is a significant amount of variability and lack of clarity on whether ticket sales can be included in your 25% or if that can be in your 75%. Because what are you really selling when you're selling a ticket? I did not go to Oregon State. I'm not an ag scientist, but you don't eat tulips. You look at tulips. That is how the consumer consumes the product. And what we're seeing is a shift in what consumerism looks like for agriculture and many agricultural commodities. Wine is a great example. You go wine tasting, you're selling the experience. And so what we see is many people, especially on down years when traditional commodity sales are not good, when people are impacted by weather, when the time is just not good or the margins are just not good, you're having people go way over that 25% income limit. And so actually my organization, we will be bringing legislation this session to try to change that and several other issues that has come up around the farm stand statute.
So I guess I have a question for Sam on that. Do you think there should be no restriction? Should it be 100%? My understanding is that was put in there to keep farm stands from becoming full-blown grocery stores.
Yeah.
And I think that makes eminent sense. And you want to define things differently, that's one thing. But if you want to get rid of the breakout to 75-25, that's a totally different thing.
I don't think we need an income restriction. At a time when our farm families are feeling immense economic stress, capping their income, I don't think is the best way to do that. And I'm not aware of any other business in the state of Oregon that is limited in how much income they can earn from promoting their business based on the underlying zoning of their property. I'm not aware of that existing anywhere else. I do think there should be requirements that farm use and farming is the primary use on the property. I think there's other ways that you can require that. That's not a limitation on income. The other issue with an income restriction is it lends itself to a point of immense contention that happened over the DLCD rec is how do you prove that? Do you have to be audited every year? Does your county have to go through your books? Do you need to put your financial statements out for the world to see? Again, I'm not sure of there being any other business in the state of Oregon that is held to that level of scrutiny on selling merchandise or doing things to promote their business. So my answer to Pierre is I don't think there should be an income restriction. I think there's another way to make sure that farm use remains the primary use of the property.
Okay. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank my fellow directors and obviously the team that helped put the panel together. It's been helpful to hear the conversation at the same time versus reading a lot of stuff coming in and trying to piecemeal it together. And Gordon, thank you, especially leaving wonderful weather to spend the afternoon with us instead. Thank you all, and this meeting will be adjourned until tomorrow morning at 8:30. Carla, I think, has different seating arrangements for our transportation, so I think we can adjourn the meeting and then you can let us know what cars we're supposed to get into to our next venue. But thank you, panel, very, very much for being here.
So a tour in April?